各位好，我是岳成刚。我们今天这期节目的客人是硅谷非常著名的风险投资人 Timothy Draper， 他是硅谷最早在中国大陆投资的风险投资家，他也是百度的第一个投资人。2001年1/4个世纪以前了， Timothy Draper 和李彦宏协商之后呢，用900万美金的价格买了百度当时28%的股权。他还投过 Hotmail、特斯拉、SpaceX、Twitter， 投过 DocuSign， 甚至还投过 Coinbase 和 Robinhood。 Timothy Draper 呢，还是 Theranos 最早的投资人之一。Theranos 这家公司呢，我想很多中国观众都知道，因为这个公司从它的崛起到最后的覆灭引起了太多的媒体关注。有一本畅销书叫 Bad Blood， 讲的就是这家公司用一滴血来指导你所有的健康问题。创始人 Elizabeth Holmes 也是备受关注，这个公司的故事被拍成了影视剧。但是作为这个公司最早期的投资人之一， Timothy 一直为这家公司鸣不平，还有他的道理。2014年 Timothy Draper 用1870万美元的价格，从美国政府的一场罚没拍卖当中买了大约是3万枚比特币，相当于每一枚比特币仅仅花了632美元。那么这批比特币今天的价格已经超过了30亿美金。我们今天这期节目就从比特币开始谈起，聊一聊当下美国政府的关税政策，聊一聊 Elon Musk， 再聊一聊 Theranos。 President Trump was saying dollar is the king and we better keep it that way. We will keep it that way. So it brings the whole conversation about whether Bitcoin will one day replace a fiat currency.Whether stable currency is probably a better bet. It's like a hybrid between Bitcoin and US dollar. You know, when people compare Bitcoin to gold, they call Bitcoin the digital gold, but there's a big difference between gold and Bitcoin. Countries like China and India, 2.5 billion people who likes gold as ornaments. They have an actual use, but Bitcoin doesn't, right?
Try to buy your tea here with gold.What are you going to do? Shave some of it off? It makes no sense. Gold is a currency of the distant past. You might as well be digging up dinosaurs. It's the old way of operating. In fact, we haven't really used gold as a currency for probably a century. And so who thinks that would ever come back? It's very impractical. It's heavy.You have to weigh it. Whereas Bitcoin moves very quickly. You can make a deal. You can build a smart contract. It's just a much better society. And Trump said, yeah, we want the dollar to be dominant. He just means it's got to be dominant over all the other fiat currencies. He's not going to let another fiat currency come take its place. But what he also says, I love Bitcoin. And why does he say that?Because he wants the innovators in the U.S. The idea of thinking of fiat over Bitcoin is a little bit like saying, oh, the French have gunpowder, the British don't. And it would be like the British saying, oh, we're not going to use gunpowder. We're going to use knives. And now Bitcoin is better currency, keeps better records.It collects taxes automatically. You can do forensic accounting on it with no problem. You don't need the accountant, the lawyer, the bookkeeper, the auditor, the transfer agent. You don't need any of those people because you actually have a currency that moves, is fungible, is international, is decentralized, is...The records are all kept perfectly on the blockchain. You've just got better currency. So this is like bringing a knife to a gunfight.
You've convinced me. I like your comment saying that if I don't invest in Bitcoin, it's like I'm not being a responsible investor to my family, myself. But let me just play the devil's advocate here and compare Bitcoin to a fiat currency.You mentioned that eventually the dollar will be gone and Bitcoin will be the global currency, the reserve currency. But let's not forget that the value or the credit of US dollar is basically guaranteed by this powerful military force in the United States. The U.S. is in charge of the most formidable military force the world has ever seen.
But don't get this wrong. It is the economy that drives the currency. It's not the military. Sure, you can force your people to only use your currency, but the value of that currency is only going to be driven by the freedom and economic value that is created in that country. So the reason the dollar is strong is because the U.S. economy is strong. And the U.S. economy is strong because of the freedoms allocated to the people. My dad gave me $1 million bill when I was 10 years old. And I said, whoa, $1 million, this is so cool. What can I do with it? And he said, nothing. And I said, what? What do you mean nothing? And he goes, that's $1 million Confederate dollars. The Confederates lost the Civil War to the Union. And so for a while, it started with the dollar being 1-to-1, but eventually they inflated the Confederate dollar so high that no one wanted it. They all wanted Union dollars. And so it went from 1-to-1 to 1,000,000 to nobody wanted any Confederate dollars anymore. I think the same thing is currently happening to fiat currencies around the globe, because you look, first you think, oh, the dollar, of course it loses whatever it is, 10% a year or 5% a year, just to inflation, right? So when you hold a dollar for a year, you have 95 cents the next year and maybe 85 the year after. Well, it turns out that if you had held a Bitcoin, the dollar drops more like 60% every year. And it has for like the last 7 years. So the dollar's really dropping off the map against Bitcoin. And you're just seeing it day to day. You don't think anything of it. Oh, yeah, well, it used to be, 1,000, and then it was at 4,000, then it was at 10,000, then it was at 30,000, then it's 100,000. And you're thinking, oh, Bitcoin keeps going up. No, the dollar is dropping. One Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin.
Yeah, I regret that when I first wanted to buy a Bitcoin after the fall of FTX.
It's not too late.
Yeah, it's not too late.
In fact, it's still early.
But there's no guarantors for Bitcoin. You mentioned there are hundreds of thousands of computers out the world.
Well, that's who are you saying is the guarantor of any fiat currency? It's all about what it's worth to the person who holds it. And today, if you said, here, I'm going to give you either one Bitcoin or $100,000, I would take the Bitcoin every single time, because I would be saying, wait, I know the $100,000 is going to be worth $90,000 next year, and the Bitcoin is going to be still worth a Bitcoin.
I'm now an investor myself. I constantly remind myself, am I looking at things with confirmation bias just because I have the holding of a lot of this particular equity, this stock? Or
I do that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So don't you ask yourself that question, that you're only looking at the signals that prove your preoccupied notions? What about disruptive technology? What about quantum computing? Will there be a major technological breakthrough that makes Bitcoin obsolete?
Well, it's interesting because as compute power improves, there is the Antminer 1 and the Antminer 2 and the Antminer 3. You would think that each new Antminer would say, oh, well, now we're going to be able to hack into the Bitcoin blockchain. It doesn't happen that way. That isn't the way it works. Better technology goes into mining, which it already has. People are using quantum computing to do Bitcoin mining. It goes into Bitcoin mining, and the miners are the people who secure the blockchain. So no quantum computer is going to be able to break into that, because it's quantum computers that are securing it. Just the way they're currently CMOS computers securing it and CMOS computers trying to hack into it. I think there are always going to be people who say the sky is falling, the world's coming to an end, we live in fear, whatever. Fear is the mind killer. And all of my worst investments were done in a defensive way. And all of my best investments were made offensively in opportunity. And Bitcoin is an opportunity for people. It's an opportunity to be global, to be open, to be transparent, to be decentralized, and to be frictionless around the globe.
And there's a gravitational pull to Bitcoin compared
Well,
to
that
the
is
other
happening.
cryptos.
Because what's happening is there still are lots of currencies out there, a lot of different crypto innovations that have happened. But much the way Microsoft started with this operating system, and people innovated around that operating system. And then Microsoft started to pull the more important applications off and made them a part of their operating system. Same thing's happening with Bitcoin. With Microsoft, it was spreadsheets, word processors, PowerPoints, and eventually the internet that they pulled into their operating system. With Bitcoin now, a lot of innovations have happened on a lot of different cryptocurrencies. Those platforms, or whatever they were, are now less than 30% of all cryptocurrency. The 63% now of all cryptocurrencies is Bitcoin. So when you've innovated on one of these little currencies, you feel like I've got to go innovate on the big currency. And so everything gets moved over to Bitcoin. So at first, Ethereum started with some DeFi, and Solana had smart contracts, and lots of different innovations have happened. Well, now all those things are being transferred to Bitcoin. So NFTs have now become ordinals and runes. Now DeFi on Bitcoin, it's everywhere. Smart contracts are now being easily programmed now on Bitcoin. So it's really fun to watch the innovation happen where the entire financial system is being slowly transferred from fiat to Bitcoin.
What about stable coin? There's a lot of excitement about Circle's IPO and a lot of talk about that. Would you consider stable coin a hybrid or a transition to Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's a bridge to Bitcoin, because what's great about stablecoin is it's digital money. It's an easy way to move money around. Some people only accept stablecoin now, and that's terrific. But stablecoin is a stable dollar or a stable peso or a stable yen or a stable euro. They're tied to fiat currencies. Fiat currencies are subject to political whims. And whether you're on the one side or the other side of government, whether you're more capitalist or socialist in government, both sides tend to spend. And that, as a result, those fiat currencies are inflating themselves out of business. And stablecoins actually, they're printing more money in effect. And so they're accelerating that inflation. But what they're also doing is allowing for people to see the way to owning Bitcoin. If you've started to use a stablecoin, it's pretty easy to just buy Bitcoin with it.
I really like your stories. Can you tell us, Tim, the story of how you accidentally got into Bitcoin, the famous auction story?
Oh, but I got into Bitcoin long before the auction.
But you were not such a believer. Right?
I was looking for digital currency, and right then I made the connection where I thought, wow, you're using fiat dollars to buy a digital good. And I thought, oh, you could have digital dollars and you can start creating an economy of digital dollars. That was maybe 2001, 2. Bitcoin came and they made a currency that was incredibly secure. That gave a huge leapfrog to any innovation that I would have ever come up with. A little like, hey, I let 1,000 flowers bloom. I don't try to tell everybody what to do. If I did, then we would only be having digital currencies between games. Now we have a real digital currency that is transforming all finance, all commerce throughout the world. And I backed some of the early Bitcoiners. I invested in Coin Lab. Then we lost a bunch of it to the Mt. Gox, whether that was a thief or a mistake. And so I thought, oh, well, too bad. That was kind of interesting. That was a good experiment. But Bitcoin didn't even go down much based on losing all that money at the biggest exchange they had, Mt. Gox. And so I said, wow, this is really important. Let's see why it's important. So I did a lot of research, and I found out all about remittance across borders. Companies were paying their employees in Bitcoin because their employees might not have had banks. So there was the unbanked were getting banked, and the unbanked amongst themselves were creating a Bitcoin economy. They were using it for, drugs and guns, but they thought that was going to be a great way around the law. But apparently everybody gets caught because the Bitcoin blockchain keeps perfect records. So they've just caught all those people. So it was very exciting to me. So I started buying it up. And then when the auction came up, it was a big block. And I was talking to all my friends about, what are you going to bid? And they were all talking about how they were going to bid under market. And I thought, well, so if I just go a little over market, I'll get at least some of these Bitcoin from the federal government. I thought I'll get one out of the 9 lots or something like that. But I got all 9 of the 9 lots. So I was way over invested.
And how much are they worth
Bitcoin.
now? All the 9 lots, how much are they worth now?
Oh, the 9 lots were about 30,000 Bitcoins. That was a big purchase. At the time, it was $19 million, and it was a lot. I was just glad my wife didn't ask a lot of questions. And
you also mentioned that you once used the Bitcoin to buy books, and it turned out to be, looking. I don't even know. I'm going to have to check to see who that author is and what he did with his Bitcoin. But I bought some books, and maybe 40 or 50 books for the Draper University founders. They may be worth about $1 million now. So otherwise, we've held pretty tight on them. Are you still buying Bitcoin? Yeah, in some way, which is, yes, I bought some, but I've also, I accept it as tuition and rent. That's somewhat increased my Bitcoin holding. Forecasting is always risky business. Most people try to stay away from it. Yeah. You seem to be pretty open about it. And what's your forecast? The reason I'm open about it is I said on Fox Business, I said in 2014, I said, and Bitcoin at that time was, I don't know, $180 or something. I said, Bitcoin's going to be 10,000 by 2017. And it turns out almost to the day in 2017, I said within 3 years, almost to the day in 2017, Bitcoin hit 10,000. Then it dropped down to 4,000. They asked me for another prediction, and I thought, oh, I can predict and whatever. So I said 250,000 by 2022. I didn't realize how, I don't know how you'd say it, but how limiting the U.S. government was going to be during that time. I didn't realize that the SEC was going to be regulating by enforcement, scaring everybody up, making everybody's life kind of miserable, and made it so that we couldn't innovate here in the U.S. around Bitcoin. So that slowed down the path to 250,000. But now I think 250,000 by the end of this year, pretty likely. And that is a combination of Bitcoin increasing and the dollar decreasing in value. You've spent some time with President Trump, and you seem to understand his policy on trade pretty well. You once compared his strategy to how the U.S. will no longer be the big-hearted moose. Tell us about that. Yeah, there was I don't know if you guys or anybody out there has ever read Dr. Seuss, but there's a Dr. Seussian book called Thidwick, the Big-Hearted Moose. And at first,
Thidwick says, oh, to the first bug that gets on his antlers, oh, go ahead, you can stay there. And then more and more animals start joining and bringing their families, and they're all in his antlers. And then there's a bear, and there are all these giant animals on his antlers. Thidwick's unhappy, and he's falling and can't even hold his head up. And then his antlers molt, and he swims to the other side of the lake for the spring. And they're saying, oh, hey, what about us? And he says, hey, you can stay on my old antlers. I'm going to go over here. So I said that about the U.S., that it was the big-hearted moose, in that the U.S. was this incredible, freedom-centered, capitalist marketplace that built an incredible economy. And it was like 70% of the world economy at one point, and it's dropped significantly since. But when it was 70%, it was willing to let people onto the antlers. And now it's not that big. And the difference between one country and another in the world is not that big in the way people live. There's Starbucks in Uganda, all over the world. And so all these things that the U.S. has been doing to sort of support other countries and do all these other things for all these other countries, I think Trump is looking and saying, well, look, we got to make it a two-way street here. We got to make it fair. And I think the tariffs were sort of a shock to the system, but each negotiation is different. And I think he's going to work out fair negotiations with people all over the world. And then ultimately, I'd love for everybody's trade barriers to fall and then have a totally free global market. I think we're probably 20 to 50 years away from that, but I think it'll happen.
The current tariff.
We almost had free trade. We almost had total freedom because the internet was lowering all of our trade barriers. That was making us work very well. You know, all those relationships I have with the Chinese, we were all benefiting a lot from those relationships. And then somehow all the countries in the world, I guess the leaders felt like they were becoming less relevant, and they all exercised their nationalistic tendencies. And that, I think, is a bummer for the world, but I think it'll swing back. I'm very optimistic that these tariffs might be a shock to a lot of people in a lot of countries, but it encourages all countries of the world to lower their barriers.
So it's like a means to an end.
It may be a means to an end, where we end up with complete free and open trade across borders. And that would be magical. And we were almost there.
The last time I have a sitting down interview with a big time CEO like you was the interviewee was Elon Musk. That was 11 years ago. Elon was all excited about going to China. That's before Tesla had this mega factory in Shanghai. It was a very different world. But you were one of the earliest investors in Tesla as well, right?
Yeah. We were the first.
So you know the man, Elon, pretty well. And I only met him once during that interview. We exchanged emails after, but I don't know him all that well. So knowing both gentlemen, Elon and President Trump, did you see this big falling out between them, like coming a while ago?
No, I thought they were very much aligned on controlling the costs of government. For some reason, Congress can just spend whatever they want, and that is that's a flaw in our system. I think the budget should be set, and Congress should politic for shares in that budget, not increase spending in that budget. But the way it is, government spending continues to grow as a percentage of GDP here in the U.S. And that is not a healthy thing. And it creates more debt. It creates more deficit spending. And the government it's got its hands tied, and it can't actually do anything for people. So it has become a little bit constrained. So I thought Trump and Elon were aligned in cutting government spending. I think Trump is very familiar with all of the barriers and where the opposition throws up lawyers and judges and whatever to try to stop them from doing what they want to do. Trump's very familiar with that. I think Elon, he gets things done so quickly and so well that he basically, it was an exercise in frustration. And he was just frustrated. I don't think he was mad at Trump as much as he was mad at the system. He couldn't get done what he wanted to do. As a CEO of a business, you make a layoff, it's a one-day story, it goes away. You fire 3 people in the Commerce Department, you hear all about their family and how they, oh my God, I work for the government because I thought I wouldn't have to work as hard and I'd have a good job forever, and that kind of thing. I could have gone to the private sector and worked hard, but I didn't. And you see these interviews and you think, well, wait, think of all the people that get laid off, when Facebook drops 10% of their workforce. But there's no big story about them. That's a one-day story and it moves on. But somehow in government, they play those things up like crazy. So they get all this sympathy and it ends up being a political force against the idea of cutting anything in government. Even if it has been around so long, it is well beyond its useful period.
I read a book called Bad Blood in Chinese version. And as a former journalist reading the book written by another Wall Street journalist.
Yeah, as a former journalist, don't believe everything you see.
I know, yeah. Journalists can be very, very biased. Confirmation bias works. And then I was at this dinner and I was sitting next to the former CFO of Theranos. And he is such a believer of Elizabeth Holmes and the company. He told me there are many people like him who are waiting for Elizabeth Holmes to return and they will start something great again. So you were one of the early investors in Theranos too, right? Now looking back, what would you say?
I think if you start a business and it affects a lot of people, you better be willing to talk to the press. Because they're going to be looking for shots. There are quite a few lessons, but surrounding yourself with lawyers is probably not a good strategy. It's probably a better strategy to talk to the press. If you're facing a big industry, in her case, she was facing all healthcare, all medicine, testing, insurance. There were going to be a lot of guns coming her way. You don't fight those off with lawyers. That's just sort of your last line of defense. You go proactively and say, look, we're going to save millions of lives. We're going to save billions and billions of dollars and gallons of blood. The first test has been approved by the FDA. We got 49 more tests to go, and we're going to get there. That would have been a fine thing to write. And it turned out actually no one was ever hurt by the different test results that she gave from whatever the incumbents gave. She just was thrown in jail because some investors were very angry and felt that she had misled them.
But to this day, are you still a believer of her talents and the technology or the engineering?
Oh, yeah, she is. Oh, I would definitely hire her back as a chief science officer somewhere, but maybe not as CEO.